Welcome back, my super horror family. Come in. Take a seat by the fireplace and warm those bones while you can. Because tonight's tale is one that will chill you to your very core. Tonight, we journey to a secluded cabin where the boundaries between past and present blur, and where love and dread coexist in a waltz of emotions.
You're not going to waste everyone's time talking about how you tried to impress that horror babe by saying you knew all about nature, are you?
No!
And then by luck you found that cabin? And you started crying that you wanted to go home?
Sit tight, hold on to your loved ones, and prepare for the tale of the cabin.
Mike's SUV cruised down Highway 2, flanked by towering pines and flickering sunlight. An old playlist from years ago came softly through the speakers. Mike tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, grinning, as he looked over at Julie, who was immersed in her smartphone. Remember how we'd get up at the crack of dawn to spot bluebirds? Mike's eyes twinkled. I brought the binoculars, just in case you wanted to this time. Julie sighed, her eyes still on her screen. Dad, I liked doing that when I was like 8. I thought old people like to sleep in. I know I do. Mike's smile faltered, and a nostalgic sadness replaced it. We could trace leaves tomorrow. I packed everything we would need, and a couple of snacks. Julie set her phone down, her patience wearing thin. Really, Dad? School's gonna be here in 3 weeks. You know I'll break out if I eat those packs of peanut butter crackers. The air inside the car seemed heavier, and it felt like the forest around them leaned in to eavesdrop. Mike gripped the steering wheel, and with no enthusiasm in his voice admitted, I get it, you're older now. But if you'd give it a chance, I bet we could find something to do out here that you'd enjoy. Plus, it'll be good to not be on that thing 24/7 for a few days. Julie clenched her fist. It's not about being unplugged, Dad. Separating me from my friends and the internet won't make me a little kid again. Mike's shoulders sagged. His earlier enthusiasm was successfully beat out of him. All right? Point taken. We don't have to do any of those things. Julie looked up at him for a moment before her eyes returned to her phone, as the car ate up the miles towards the cabin. An awkward quiet settled in, punctuated only by the distant hooting of an owl or the rustling of leaves. The SUV's headlights cut through the darkness as they pulled up to the cabin, revealing its weather-beaten face. The years had not been kind. The wood was graying, and the porch sagged noticeably. Mike stepped out of the car, taking it all in. Well, looks like the place has gotten older. Just like us, huh? Julie only grunted, hoisting her bag from the back seat. Seeing an opportunity to connect, Mike grabbed his bag and cleared his throat. So, any guys at school you're interested in? Julie looked at him sharply. Are you for real, Dad? Her tone made it clear that she was not buying his newfound interest in her love life. I just thought we could talk. About this? Mike sighed, the weight of his failed attempt settling deep. I was just asking, Jules. No big deal. Julie shook her head and made her way towards the cabin. I'm gonna go to bed. It was a long drive. Good night then, Mike said softly, watching as his daughter disappeared into the dimly lit cabin. His eyes lingered on the doorway long after she'd gone. Years ago, she would leave the front door open, go inside, and run as fast as she could from the inside, and launch herself into his arms as he stood right off the porch. And at night, they'd eat popcorn laced with M&Ms. It was the same cabin, the same place, and still it was impossibly far away. Mike pushed open the creaking door of the cabin and stepped inside. The smell of aged wood filled the air as he headed straight to his bedroom. Setting his bag down, he'd emptied his pockets onto the nightstand. Keys, a wallet, and 2 packs of M&Ms. Optimistic remnants of a plan now soured. He looked at an old photo of him and Julie now sitting beside the bags of candy. then turned off the light and closed his eyes. He fell asleep almost immediately, but it was a terrible, restless sleep. In his dreams, he was back in the old days, sunlit mornings and laughter filling the air. He saw a younger version of himself playing with a much younger Julie. They were so close, yet impossibly far, separated by an invisible barrier that he couldn't reach. In each dream segment, he tried to reach them, to touch his daughter's face or to give his younger self a knowing pat on the back, but his hands only met emptiness. He shouted, trying to communicate the love, the yearning, but the words were swallowed up, leaving him mute and frustrated. And so he spent the night chasing phantoms of his past he could see but not touch. A spectator to his own history, wishing for a bridge to when love was simpler, and M&Ms and popcorns were all that were needed to make his daughter smile. The next morning, the cabin was veiled in a mist. Mike, groggy from his restless dreams, pushed himself to get up. He brewed some coffee and started making breakfast, hoping the smell of sizzling bacon would lighten the mood. "Got a whole bunch of fun stuff planned for us today," he announced as Julie trudged into the kitchen, not hiding her lack of enthusiasm. "That sounds great, Dad," she said flatly, taking a seat. Mike, sensing her sarcasm, felt a pang of irritation. "Well, if you have something you'd like to do, you could let me know." The awkward silence that followed was suffocating. Julie broke it by pointing to an old photo on the mantel. "Have you noticed anything strange in this cabin? Like, look at this picture. Why is your face all blurred out?" Mike looked at the photo. The blur on his face ruined what was otherwise a beautiful picture of him and Julie. "Are you messing with me?" Julie, this isn't funny." "I didn't do anything, Dad. Why would I?" Anger and exhaustion surged through Mike. "So you're telling me you have no idea why one of my precious memories is ruined? You didn't splash it with water or maybe some nail polish remover? I don't care enough to ruin any of your stupid pictures," Julie shouted before storming out of the room. Mike was left standing there, his heart pounding, realization sinking in that he had lost control. For a moment, he was a stranger even to himself. The emotional toll of the morning, coupled with the sleepless night, finally broke him. "Fine," he whispered to the empty room, as he quickly turned off the oven and retreated to his bedroom. Laying down on the bed, he turned to the nightstand and grabbed a bag of M&Ms. He opened it, put a few in his mouth, and fell asleep. While Mike was lost in another round of troubled dreams, Julie quietly re-entered the cabin. The gray light from outside poured in through the windows, and the wind blowing outside began to sound like voices. Julie paused, tilting her head to listen. It wasn't the wind. Couldn't be. The words were familiar but distorted. They were like echoes of old conversations she had shared with her dad at the cabin. "Maybe I'm going through social media withdrawal," she mused playfully, though a shiver ran down her spine. Like her father, she too slept poorly. Normally the cabin was a place of rest, its silence lulling her to sleep after a long day's hike. But last night something was wrong. There was something just off about the cabin. Something creating unease. She looked out the window. The mist that surrounded the cabin in the morning turned into rain, and a damp chill started to settle in. Time for a fire, she thought. Remembering the wood they bought yesterday was sitting outside in the rain, she headed to an old shed, usually a good backup for firewood. She stacked her arms with logs, careful to choose ones that hadn't rotted away. As she turned to leave, her eyes caught the spine of an attractive leather-bound book on the ground. Intrigued, she tucked the book under her arm, along with the wood, and made her way back to the cabin. After starting the fire, Julie sat down and opened the leather-bound book. It was an old journal, filled with handwritten entries. Half of the pages were torn out. The first entry that caught her attention was dated May 22nd, 1932. "The isolation here is a balm for my grief. This once was the happiest of places, and now the joy that I once had with Barbara is... The page was ripped, abruptly ending the entry. Another entry read, July 15th, 1932. Years ago, my friends and neighbors warned me this land might be cursed. They asked me not to come here. I laughed it off then, but now the silence is unbearable. It mocks me. I've found old symbols carved on the trees in these woods. They suggest this is a place of forbidden rituals. Well, one good turn deserves another. Any entity strong enough to take is strong enough to give. If there is an entity here, I'm willing to strike a deal to see her face again. She flipped a few more pages and landed on a darker entry. October 31st, 1932. Tonight is the night. I've gathered the necessary components. If all goes well, I'll see her once more. Even if it's just a shadow, a whisper. She had the ability to light up a room just by entering it. If she was only a shadow, she would be a shadow that gives light. Every father knows his daughter is the most beautiful girl in the world. My soul, marred by emptiness, is a small price to pay to see her again. It was the last entry he'd wrote. What happened here? Julie closed the book. A tinge of guilt was felt. Every father knows his daughter is the most beautiful girl in the world. Those words were the last puzzle pieces she needed to make things clear. Mike woke up to the crackling sound of the fire. He shuffled out of the room. Julie rushed over, holding the leather-bound journal she discovered. "Dad, you have to see this. It's like something out of a horror movie." He barely glanced over at her. Or the book. "That's nice," he said, moving away from her. Julie examined him, though it was hard, as he tried to keep her from looking directly at his face. His eyes were swollen. His skin was pale. He walked to an old closet, pulled out some of Julie's childhood coloring books, and shuffled back to his room, closing the door behind him. Julie stood there, a mixture of hurt, confusion, and anger bubbling up inside of her. "We're stuck in this cabin for days. He can't avoid me forever," she thought. But being practically ignored hurt more than she cared to admit. She didn't even want to come to the cabin in the first place, and now it felt like she was there alone. Julie collected her thoughts. Maybe her dad became sick, poor sleep, really sad, no breakfast. Yes, he must be sick, and if no food and sadness were what was making him sick, maybe a little food, happiness, and a good night's rest could bring him back. Julie immediately started to make some spaghetti for dinner. Once it was ready, she approached her father's room cautiously, cracking open the door. "Dad? Dad? Dinner's ready. I made spaghetti." But no response was given. She positioned her ear in the doorway and could hear the faint sounds of his snoring. "I'll eat now and try to wake him up later," she reasoned. As she sat down to eat, her eyes wandered around the room, and then she froze. Every family photo she could see on the walls of the cabin had undergone a chilling transformation. Her father's face was blurred in all of them. Julie pushed the plate of spaghetti away, her appetite lost. Something was horribly wrong. Julie sat as still as she could as she tried to make sense of the altered photos. In her peripheral vision, she caught a glimpse of a small figure hiding behind the sofa. It was a young girl. A strikingly familiar young girl. It was her. Except her eyes were completely black voids. Not wanting to alarm whatever was impersonating her younger self, Julie feigned calmness. "You know, spaghetti is his favorite. I really should get him for dinner," she said out loud, as if talking to herself. She used the moment to slip into her father's room. The room was ice cold, like walking into a freezer. Her dad was laying on the bed, surrounded by M&Ms and old pages from coloring books she remembered coloring as a child. He looked almost translucent now, as if he were fading away. He opened his eyes, and for a moment seemed to see her. "Barbara," he whispered, his face breaking into a weak smile. Julie's heart sank. Panicked, she dashed out of the room, grabbed the journal from the table, and hurled it into the fire. The fire roared as if hungry for the dark secrets within the book. That's when it happened. The figure of the young Julie emerged from behind the sofa, except now it twisted and contorted, transforming into a wraith-like monster. The room was suddenly filled with hurricane-like winds, lifting objects, pushing furniture, and pulling things off the wall. The wraith began to approach Julie, its form an ever-shifting nightmare. Julie burst back into her dad's room, screaming. "Dad, wake up! We need to get out of here!" But her dad just mumbled, entranced by the coloring book pages. Terrified and desperate, she shouted, "Dad, I'm right here, now! Not in those coloring books, not in the past!" Mike looked up, his eyes red and wet with tears. "I know. I just don't think there's room for me here." The wraith appeared to spasm at the excitement and chaos. Julie went to grab her dad to force him out of the bed, but she couldn't. Her hand would go right through his arm, like he was a ghost. Then something in Julie's head just clicked. She turned to her dad's nightstand, snatched the framed photo of the two of them, and as quickly as she could, removed the old picture. Digging a pen out of her pocket, she scribbled on the backside, "Dad and Julie, Cabin Trip 2023, then thrust it towards her dad. "Look! We can make new memories!" Mike's eyes locked onto the photo. As he held it, something miraculous happened. His skin regained its color, his form solidifying, as if fighting back the translucence that threatened to erase him. He stood up, still trembling but resolute, pulling Julie behind him as he faced the wraith. "You're not taking anything else from us," he said, his voice tinged with a newfound strength. The entity hesitated, as if puzzled by this sudden turn of events. It seemed to shudder, its form flickering like a dying light bulb. Realizing it no longer had power over either of them, it let out an anguished howl before spiraling out of Mike's room, back into the living room, and into the journal, which was still engulfed in flames. As it entered the journal, the flames erupted in a final burst of energy before simmering down to ashes. Julie and Mike walked out of the bedroom and looked at the mess that was created. The cabin was in utter chaos. The furniture was strewn about, and spaghetti covered the walls, the furniture, even the ceiling. Mike chuckled. "So, I see you cooked dinner." "Yup, and you know the rules. That means you have to do the dishes." "Is there any dishes?" "I meant the ceiling, Dad." "Oh, I'm hungry. How about instead, I take you out for a pizza, and maybe we stay at a hotel tonight. Tomorrow we could find a mall, maybe catch a movie. Can we do Chinese? I've seen enough pasta for today." "Good point." As they got into the car, Mike took the photo that Julie scribbled on and placed it carefully in the sun visor. He turned on the car. The Bluetooth turned on, and automatically the music from his old playlist gently filled the air as they drove off.
Whew! What a... Hey, wait, what? What's going on? Did we run out of color budget? Oh man. Well, if you want to help us keep the color, consider joining us for $1 a month on Patreon. Now, before you flee back to your comfort zones, let me say something important. Each and every one of you out there has immense value. Whether you're navigating the dark corridors of a haunted cabin or the twisted pathways of life, never forget that your story, like tonight's tale, has its worth. And despite where you are, it can have a happy ending. And Mike and Julie did have a happy ending. It took them 50 minutes of driving to find a Chinese restaurant. But what else could they do? They were past the point of no return.